Godzilla, an icon, a hero, a legend. But have you ever wanted to see Godzilla dead? Well, now you can! You can build your own dead Godzilla. This right here is the Godzilla 2024 from Godzilla X Khan: The New Empire model kit by Bandai. What we've got right here is basically a model kit where you can build up the skeleton of Godzilla, and then you can build some skin on over it if you want some skin on Godzilla. Sadly, I did notice it's an either-or option. It would be cool that, you know, you could build both, but we'll see what we can do. This right here is basically a variant of Bandai's Planosaurus line of plastic model kits, which are pretty much the same thing, except it's dinosaur skeletons as opposed to Godzilla skeletons. I actually think this is a pretty cool idea, applying this concept to other IPs. But before I go any further, I will mention this video right here was sponsored by those awesome people over at HobbyLink Japan, so if you do want one of these, there will be a link in the description. This came out on the 14th of September and costs around $50. So first off, taking a little bit of a look around the box, we've got some information about this particular model of Godzilla right here. It says, detailed coloring of the inner mouth enabled by division of parts. Sliding over ever so slightly, what it says is, from the characteristic shape of his scaly hide to the bones carved into a dynamic pose, only achievable in a fixed model. Godzilla is reproduced in painstaking detail. For me, it's definitely the skeleton that gets me interested about this. You can get figures all over the place and stuff of Godzilla from with his skin on, but not so much with its skin off. What it says is the joints on the dorsal plates are transparent, interesting. And down here then it says, in addition to their dynamic pose, the bones are extremely detailed, creating a Godzilla skeleton that is realistic in form and construction. On the last side right here, then it says, it says you can construct the shell and the skeleton separately and display them side by side, or put the bones on the inside. Oh, that's cool. Maybe we do have a bit of a 2-in-1. Around then on the other final side, it says the dimensions of this, so it's about 14.5 centimeters tall and 25.5 centimeters long. So it'll be interesting to see that. If you can build them both, I'm very happy about that. And over here a little further, it does say that the designer is Shinji Nishikawa, who apparently worked on Godzilla vs. Biollante and Godzilla Final Wars, is who basically designed this skeleton of this particular kit. Let's get it open. Alright, so checking out what we've got inside of the box right here. Goodbye lid. And the parts in here do look like they are quite large. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bags of runners, as well as the manual itself right here. Actually, that's a pretty good picture on there. Alright, so busting the parts out of the bags now and taking a little bit of a look at it. So it is interesting to know that we can actually build this as 2 separate model kits, or one inside the other. I'm definitely going to be going for the 2 because I don't want to hide that cool skeleton. As for the parts, it seems like the mold on the actual Godzilla itself is a little bit on the, I'd almost describe it as a not so sharp kind of side. Hard to tell just yet. Actually, taking a look at some of these little bits right here, it doesn't look too bad at all. But again, what's really got me interested are the skeletal aspects of this particular kit. Like, a skeleton model kit is just such a fun idea. Like I said, especially of unique kind of IPs like Godzilla right here. Now, from what I can tell about the plastic right here, I do think this is made out of standard kind of model kit plastic. I thought it might be made out of that interesting kind of limestone-based plastic Bandai was using on some of these skeletal model kits before, but I guess that might be a certain line of them. We also do have some clear aspects as well inside this box, but this seems to be various stands for holding up the completed model. Apparently these are from the plates on the back, so you don't kind of, well, see what the kind of clips that are holding it together. We also have the red sections for the mouth right here, and overall looking interesting so far. The manual here looking quite nice as well. The illustration on the actual manual looks great. Open it up, it gives you all the information on the various parts of the model. Assembly is Bandai's usual routine, so it looks simple enough to follow. The parts look reasonably big, and in the center there is the interview with Shinji Nishikawa about the design of this particular model kit, so quite a lot of detail about it. On the back then, some info on weathering it up if you do want to add some weathering to it. It seems they are recommending Mr. Weathering Color by Mr. Hobby. Just so you know, you will need a nipper to cut out this model kit, just in case you're not too familiar with Bandai's kits. It's just simple snipping, nothing too difficult whatsoever. And when it comes to the skeleton, this right here is what you get once it's done, and this is it's a whole lot of fun, a whole lot of awesome, and something I never knew I needed in my life, but I do. Anyway, as to how this thing builds up, The build of this kit right here is relatively simple for the most part, but there are a little bit of somewhat awkward aspects a little bit later on the fins. As for the head, it's just 4 parts: the sides of the head, the top of the head, and then the jaw snaps in from underneath. Very simple. The pieces are a little bit on the small side, but not too small or unwieldy. You then move down to the rib cage, you add the spine section onto the first half of the ribs, and then slot the other half on like so. And again, the molding on this is incredible. Then you slap the clavicle or collarbone onto the front, start working on the neck by bringing it in underneath the spine, attaching it onto the ribs we had before, and then that locks in place with a piece on top. Then you can actually throw the head back onto it. Well, onto it for the first time. It was never on there before. Now we're working our way down to the lower body of Godzilla. So that is, you're working on some more of the spine, 2 sections attached together like so. Then you bring part of the tail onto this and lock it in position with an underpiece like this. Then you attach this onto what is going to be the main body of Godzilla's spine, and then you bring the upper body we finished before into the equation, finally locking it in with another half to the main body. Again, easy to do, everything fits where they should, and it's extremely enjoyable. Next up then is the hips. Both sides are pretty much the same. You can't mix them up, which is one good thing with this kit. Things don't fit where they're not supposed to go. So you add on a little piece on each side for the hips, then the main pelvic aspect. So you end up with the full pelvis right here, like this. Moving down once again, it's time for the legs. The femur, upper leg bone, that has 2 halves that attach together like so. The 2 lower bones in the leg are already attached together. You just have to slap them into the foot, attach them onto the femur we did already, and that attaches into the pelvis. Once again, you can't put the wrong leg on the wrong side because it just won't fit. As for the other leg, it builds up the same way. 2 halves to the femur, lower leg onto the foot, and you attach that all together, and blam, right onto the pelvis once again. The next part of the build on here is the arms. Now these are laid out in the runners very nicely. So these 3 parts just above each other, these are all part of one arm. So you can almost blind build this kit after a little while of kind of getting used to it. So on this arm there's 3 pieces. That's the main arm itself, half of the humerus bone or upper arm bone, and the thumb and index finger are separate and they slap on like so. It's exactly the same on the other side. Half and half of an upper arm bone, then the thumb and the finger. These both attach onto Godzilla. These are a little bit, I wouldn't say difficult to attach, but aligning them up might take a couple of seconds. They do feel quite delicate, so be careful, and at this point it almost looks like Godzilla is finished. At least, it's skeleton proper. Next up we've got the fins on the back. So you've got a whole lot of these to cut out, which will take a little bit of time. These don't directly connect into the skeleton, so I'm assuming these are not part of Godzilla's skeleton. I guess more like a stegosaurus, they're just parts of the skin, if you know what I mean, kind of like hair. These plates attach into little clear pieces, and this is the most awkward part of it. Trying to find the actual right orientation for the actual little clear pieces to attach in the central fin, and then you have to slap onto from the sides. It can be a little bit confusing. You get used to it after the first one, but the first one is tiny, tiny, tiny. Then you attach all these onto the back of Godzilla. Once again, it seems like and feels like you can't put the wrong ones in the wrong place, because when it was further down the back, I tried to put on one backwards a couple of times and it just wouldn't fit at all. I just flipped it and then it slid right into place. It's a very simple, easy build, and this is just such a cool little model. And finally, there we go. There is that skeletal Godzilla complete. As you can see, it can't actually stand up itself without support butt. And speaking of support butt, this right here is the support butt, because it supports butt, and it goes in just under the Godzilla butt right here. It actually holds on very, very nicely. If you keep it level on the ground, it will just kind of lock into where it's meant to be. And that right there is it complete, and it does look very, very nice. Honestly, what can I say? A Godzilla skeletal statue is such a cool thing to have. It is a very nice size too. It's not too big, not too small. It will go on a desk or on a nice shelf somewhere, and overall the details are nice. It does recommend to weather this inside of the manual. The way it actually says to do that is to use Mr. Weathering, whatever it's called. Hold on, let me check. Mr. Weathering Color. Now, I'm not sure if you could just throw on any kind of shade that you could get from various different hobby brands like Army Painter or Games Workshop or anything like that. Maybe you could, maybe you couldn't, I'm not exactly sure. It says to paint on that Mr. Weathering Color, let it dry, but before actually letting it dry, to mop off the excess using some cotton buds and to actually file the surface of it then with some sanding sticks to kind of get a realistic bone texture. However, out of the box it's going to look like this right here that you're seeing. overall it does look really cool. Now, if I was to be somewhat picky about it, there is some kind of seams here and there. As you can see in the top of the snout right there, we do have that little bit of a line. No matter how much you kind of close on this, it doesn't really close. So if you don't like something like that, and if you want it to look perfect, you may have to use some plastic cement to close those seams. They're the only ones that are really all that well. No, actually, there's quite a few noticeable ones all around the place. You could almost consider those some kind of bone fissures or something. They're not really as obvious as the head, and you're not going to look at the head too much. There are some in the hip bones as well, so, you know, those sort of things are there to keep in mind if that's something you would like to close up. The clear parts making these float actually do look really well. For the most part, you don't really, well, even see the clips that are holding them on unless they catch the light like that. Overall, this is pretty awesome. On to the other form. So next on the menu is this right here. So it's a full-on model of Godzilla, well, with its skin on. There is no skeleton inside of this. I have the skeleton still back there. You do actually have the option of building this with the skeleton inside. Now, one thing that made me very, very happy is the fact that this does include the skull a second time, because as you can see, it does have teeth, which are part of that skull. If Bandai had left that out, you'd be stuck with an either or build. Also, this does feel completely disassemblable once finished. So it does mean if you do want to actually just take this apart and pop the skeleton in, you probably can do that. But anyway, about the build, this actually builds up in a slightly different order than the skeleton, which is something I appreciate. I like when the builds are mixed up a little bit so they don't get a bit samey. You start off with the arms. Both arms are similar. You have a front and a back to both, and a front and a back to the hands. Now, the reason for this, of course, is that makes them sandwichable around a skeleton even. If you want to do it that way. Both of these arms then attach into the front aspect of Godzilla just like so. So these can get a little bit confusing finding the attachments for them, but overall pretty simple. After finishing the front side, we're moving around to the back. You start off with one side and add half of the spines onto that with this long ridged segment. You do the exact same on the other side, that is this side of Godzilla, and some of the spines. Then you take both of those sides and slap them together, and you've pretty much got 2/3 of the spines ready on its back, and then you slap the back onto the front and you get this right here. You jump around on this model quite a little bit. Next up, you're moving down to the tail. You build, well, you have the bottom, you build on the side, and then you build on the other side. At this point, you don't actually put the top onto it yet. You actually put this with the top wide open into the side of the middle chunky part of the tail. Then you sandwich that in with the other half, so once again you are missing the back. This then attaches on to the main body of the Godzilla we had built already, and that then holds on with a segment that goes on from underneath, locking the tail onto the body of Godzilla. And I'm guessing the reason we don't have any back just yet is I think that's also part of the locking mechanism. So you do add in the top of the tail in 3 segments, moving from the body towards the tip of the tail till it's all closed up. Next up, you're building the spine section. That's a left and a right half of all the major spines on Godzilla's back. And then finally, you do attach this into the back of Godzilla. Again, everything fits where it needs to. Nothing is confusing around this point, and it is very simple to do. Big parts, nothing difficult, quite easy, and impressive. Next up in here, we do have the legs. These kind of build up almost at first in a way that you can't really tell too much of what exactly you're building. But once you start throwing on the calf section at the bottom and then the knee on, you know exactly where you're standing. This holds together very well. Of course, this is a kind of sandwich style once again, because there will be bones inside of that. If you want the bones inside, the foot is just 2 pieces. Again, it closes like this. Again, all the sandwiching is so it's easy to close it around bones. Both legs are pretty much identical, just the other way around, so when you're building the second one, it's a whole lot simpler than the first time when you're kind of trying to find your orientation a little bit. Foot's the same, and then once you have both legs built, they just attach onto the side of Godzilla like so. You can usually find the attachment points quite easily because they are very, very large. Everything is quite fluid, and it does slot in and hold on quite well. Finally then onto the head, and this is the most detailed aspect of this kit. First off, you've got the inside of the mouth, which is 3 pieces, including a tongue section, all color separated very, very nicely. 2 shades of red here. Next up, you actually have some more skull parts, so there is a second skull included on the runners, and you build that then around the mouth, including the lower jaw from beneath. So this is a 3-layered skull. You've got the inner red section of the mouth, the skull, and then you build on the skin at the end. Everything works out well once again. Nothing is too difficult. You pop it onto Godzilla like so, and it is complete. Again, extremely, extremely nice. And there we go, there is the Skin Godzilla complete. Once again, this is in a kind of very nice dynamic pose. That does mean it is a little bit back heavy with that big old tail. However, we do have one of these butt supports once again to hold it up. This has a little arrow on it to let you know which way points towards the, if I'm not mistaken, it's to the back. And then you just hold this level and you'll find the spot. It just happens into it, falls into it nicely. Maybe the arrow points the other way, actually. Hold on, let me see if that works out a little bit better. It took a bit of wiggling. The first time I did it, I got it perfect straight away, but it does fit flush onto it, which is very, very nice. So there is the skin version of Godzilla, as in the standard version of Godzilla. Now, I have to say, this to me is not quite as impressive as the actual skeleton itself. The skeleton just is so perfect, it caught the light in an amazing sort of way, and it just, out of box, was a finished piece. This feels very unfinished out of box. First off, there is a ton of seam lines running through it all over the place from the way it is assembled from kind of big old plates. Again, this isn't a big deal if you like the fact that you can actually disassemble this, pop the skeleton inside, close it up, and do that over and over and over again, just for the fun of it. But if you do want a completed model of Godzilla, they are definitely a little obvious, and closing all of those seams with cement would take quite a bit of time. On top of that, the overall finish on this is very gelatinous feeling. It's not very sharp, and it does feel a little bit on the kind of melty side, like it was a nice Godzilla figure that was left in the heat too long. The other aspect is the fact that it is extremely, extremely shiny out of box, and this would need something like a matte top coat or something to bring down that shine. But again, the seams, the shininess, and just the overall lack of definition does make it a little less impressive to me than what we saw with that cool skeleton. So anyway, that right there is it for the review, and I'm just going to close out the video with a couple of size comparisons. Overall opinion is, I love the skeleton. I think it's so cool. A little bit of lowlights in there, some shadowing. It's going to look phenomenal. It already does when put in the right light. As for the skin aspect, that is cool if you are going to use that as something you're going to pop on and off of the actual skeleton, but as a model itself, it will need a lot of work to really look presentable. It is a little bit plain out of box, a lot of seam lines through it, again, gelatinous detail, and it is extremely, extremely shiny. So yeah, skeleton awesome, regular Godzilla, it's okay. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching. I got these through Hobby Link Japan, link is down there in the description. As always, thank you so much. I think I said that already, but thanks for watching. See you next time. Once again, I can't finish this video right here without special thanks to the channel members and the patrons over on Patreon, including Simon Paskin, Abraxas, Caleb Engelhart, Joe, RG59061, ShadowWolf179, Van Fawn, and Scotty Thomas.